What happens when the galaxy's mightiest civilizations, armed with technology that can shatter stars and bend reality itself, find themselves cornered by an enemy so ancient and relentless that even their combined might isn't enough? What happens when species that have ruled the cosmos for millions of years discover that survival might depend on the most unlikely allies imaginable, a young species from a backwater planet that barely knows how to leave its own solar system? The Zephyrians had conquered death itself. The Chromot could manipulate matter at the quantum level. The ethereal Veiltar existed partially outside of normal spacetime. Together, they had built an empire that spanned 3 galactic arms and endured for eons. They thought they had seen everything the universe could throw at them. They were wrong. When the Devourers emerged from the void between galaxies, bringing with them technology that defied every known law of physics, the Great Galactic Alliance found themselves facing extinction. Their fleets, numbering in the millions, were being systematically destroyed. Their fortress worlds, protected by shields that could withstand supernovas, were falling one by one. Their most brilliant minds, enhanced by millennia of genetic and cybernetic evolution, couldn't find a solution. In their darkest hour, as the last bastions of galactic civilization prepared for a final, futile stand, a message arrived from the outer rim. From a small, blue-green world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. From a species that had just learned to split the atom and barely understood the concept of faster-than-light travel. The humans were coming to help. The galaxy's elite couldn't decide whether to laugh or weep. But, as the human fleet approached, primitive ships held together by determination and prayers, crewed by beings who didn't even live a full century, something impossible began to happen. The tide of war started to turn. Sometimes, the galaxy's salvation comes from the most unexpected source. Sometimes, what matters isn't how advanced you are, but how human you can be. The war room of the Galactic Concordance fell silent as the holographic display updated with the latest battle reports. Admiral Fexbar of the Zephyrian fleet watched the red markers spread across the three-dimensional map like a plague, each one representing another fallen world, another billion souls lost to the Devourers. Kepler 438b has gone dark, reported Intelligence Officer Nixera, her crystalline form shimmering with anxiety. That's the 7th core world this week. The evacuation ships never made it out. Around the massive circular table, representatives from 12 different species shifted uncomfortably. The Chromot delegates, their massive forms encased in environmental suits, emanated low-frequency vibrations of distress. The ethereal Veiltar flickered in and out of visible spectrum, their panic causing them to lose cohesion with normal spacetime. Admiral Fexvar stood, his forearms spread wide as he addressed the assembly. At over 3 centuries old, he had lived through the Great Unification Wars, the Synthetic Uprising, and the Dimensional Breach Crisis. His scaled hide bore scars from a dozen conflicts, and his 6 eyes had seen empires rise and fall. But nothing had prepared him for this. Friends, he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through countless battles, we must face the truth. The Devourers are not merely another hostile species. They are something else entirely. The main display shifted to show footage from the Battle of Proxima Central. The assembled leaders watched in horrified fascination as Devourer ships, if they could even be called ships, tore through the Concordance fleet. The alien vessels seemed to shift and flow like living metal, their hulls reflecting no light and seeming to bend space around them. Energy weapons that could vaporize asteroids simply passed through them harmlessly, while their own weapons reduced mighty dreadnoughts to component atoms in seconds. Our best scientists cannot explain their technology, continued General Vornax of the Chromot War Council, his translator rendering his subsonic speech into standard galactic. They appear to violate fundamental laws of physics. Matter conservation, energy dynamics, even causality itself. Dr. Yelena, the chief Veiltar researcher, materialized fully as she spoke. We have detected temporal distortions around their vessels. They may be operating partially outside our timeline, which would explain their seeming invulnerability to conventional weapons. The room erupted in concerned chatter across multiple languages and communication methods. Some species vocalized, others used bioluminescent displays, and a few communicated through controlled electromagnetic pulses. The babble of alien discourse filled the chamber until Admiral Fexbar called for order. The question before us is simple, he announced grimly. Do we make our final stand here at the galactic core, or do we attempt a fighting retreat to the Outer Rim territories? Commander Zalketh of the Hegemony Defense Force stood, her insectoid frame clicking as she moved. A retreat would only delay the inevitable. The Devourers have shown they can track our fleets across vast distances. Better to concentrate our remaining forces and make them pay dearly for every system. With respect, Commander, interjected Admiral Mordek of the Stellar Navy, we've tried concentrated defense. Remember the fortress of Vega Prime? 50,000 ships, the most advanced defensive platforms in the galaxy, and it lasted exactly 4 hours against a single Devourer fleet. The debate continued for hours, with each faction presenting strategies that had already failed elsewhere. The grim mathematics of war painted a clear picture. The Concordance had lost 60% of its military forces in 3 months. At the current rate of attrition, organized resistance would collapse within weeks. As the arguments grew more heated, a junior communications officer approached Admiral Thexvar hesitantly. The young Eltarian's tentacles were pale with nervousness as she held out a data pad. "Sir, we've received an unusual transmission from Sector 7G. The Outer Rim territories." Thexvar glanced at the pad dismissively. "Officer Kalana, we have no time for routine communications from backwater systems." "Sir, it's not routine. The message claims to be from a species requesting permission to join the defense of the galaxy. But, the species isn't in our database." This caught the Admiral's attention. The Galactic Concordance maintained detailed records of every known sapient species, from the great core civilizations to the primitive tribes of newly discovered worlds. An unknown species making contact during a galactic war was unprecedented. "Put it through the main display," Thexvar ordered. The room fell silent as a new hologram materialized. The figure that appeared was unlike anything in their xenobiological databases. Bipedal, covered in pale flesh rather than scales, chitin, or energy matrices. No apparent technological enhancements, no visible weapons systems, no environmental suit despite clearly being aboard a spacecraft. "Greetings," the figure said in accented but understandable galactic standard. "My name is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We represent the human species from the Sol system. We've been monitoring your communications regarding the hostile force you call the Devourers. We're here to offer our assistance." For a moment, nobody moved. Then, General Vornax began what could only be described as laughter, a sound like grinding stone that echoed through the chamber. "Humans," he rumbled. "We have no record of this species in our databases. What manner of weapons do you bring? What technologies?" Admiral Chen smiled, an expression that somehow managed to convey both determination and humility. "We bring nuclear weapons, chemical propulsion, and about 300 ships held together with determination and spare parts. We also bring something else you might find useful." "And what is that?" Admiral Thexvar asked, genuinely curious despite himself. "We bring the perspective of a species that has never known a war it couldn't win eventually, because we've never fought a war where retreat was truly an option. When you live on one small planet with nowhere else to go, you learn to be very, very creative about survival." The alien leaders exchanged glances across the spectrum of visible and non-visible light. Here was a species so primitive they used chemical rockets, offering to help civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel before their sun was born. "With all due respect, Admiral Chen," Commander Zalketh interjected, "the Devourers have weapons that can destroy planets. They have technology that defies our understanding of reality itself. What could your species possibly contribute?" Admiral Chen's smile widened. "Commander, have you ever heard the humans saying that when you're fighting for your life, there's no such thing as fighting dirty? We've spent our entire species development fighting each other for resources on a world that's tried to kill us since we first learned to make fire. We've survived ice ages, plagues, meteor impacts, and our own stupidity. We've never faced an enemy we didn't eventually find a way to defeat." She paused, and, when she continued, there was steel in her voice. "The Devourers might be advanced, but they're about to learn something that every species eventually learns when they threaten humanity: we don't know when to quit. And, sometimes, that's enough." Dr. Yelena flickered with interest. You speak of fighting as if it were an art form. But surely you must understand the hopelessness of the situation. The enemy's technology is simply too advanced. Doctor, may I ask you something? Admiral Chan leaned forward slightly. In all your study of the Devourers, have you ever seen them adapt their tactics? Change their strategies based on resistance they encounter? No, the Veiltar scientist admitted. They appear to use the same approach in every engagement. Overwhelming technological superiority applied with mathematical precision. Then, they've never fought humans, Admiral Chen said quietly. Because if there's one thing we excel at, it's adapting to enemies who should be able to destroy us. We call it punching above our weight class, and we've been doing it since our ancestors figured out how to take down creatures 10 times their size with pointy sticks and teamwork. Admiral Fexvar found himself intrigued despite the apparent hopelessness of the situation. Throughout his long career, he had learned to value unconventional thinking, and this human female displayed a confidence that seemed either admirably brave or completely insane. Very well, Admiral Chen, he said finally. What exactly are you proposing? The human's expression grew serious. We've analyzed the battle recordings you've made available through your communication networks. The Devourers are incredibly advanced, but they fight like a species that has never encountered meaningful resistance. They expect their enemies to engage them directly, ship to ship, weapon to weapon. She gestured, and her own holographic display activated, showing tactical diagrams that looked primitive compared to Concordance technology but displayed a level of strategic thinking that was undeniably sophisticated. What if we don't fight them the way they expect? What if instead of trying to match their technology, we exploit the fact that they don't seem to understand asymmetric warfare? The alien commanders studied the human tactical displays with growing interest. The strategies were unlike anything in their military doctrines, showing a willingness to sacrifice material assets for strategic advantage that bordered on the reckless. These tactics, General Vornax observed, they assume a willingness to take enormous casualties. General, every human in our fleet volunteered for this mission knowing they probably wouldn't return home, Admiral Chen replied simply. When your entire species faces extinction, the calculus changes. We're not here to win a war in the traditional sense. We're here to buy time and, maybe, just maybe, teach the Devourers that conquering this galaxy is going to cost them more than they bargained for. As the assembled leaders absorbed the implications of humanity's proposal, long-range sensors detected new contacts entering the system. The display updated to show a motley collection of ships that looked like they had been cobbled together from scrap metal and good intentions. They moved in formations that violated every principle of proper fleet tactics, yet somehow maintained coherent unit integrity. Those are your reinforcements? Commander Zalkath asked incredulously. Admiral Chen nodded proudly. 300 ships, 40,000 crew members, and the collected determination of a species that has never known the luxury of surrender. We may not be much to look at, but we're here, we're ready to fight, and we absolutely refuse to let this galaxy fall without making the enemy pay for every inch. For the first time in months, Admiral Fexbar felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Not because he believed this primitive species could single-handedly defeat the Devourers, but because their arrival represented something equally important. They represented proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, intelligence and courage could still choose to stand and fight rather than simply wait for extinction. The human fleet arrived at the terminus defense line just as the Devourer advance forces emerged from hyperspace. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the UES Defiance as alien warships the size of cities materialized against the starfield, their dark hulls seeming to absorb light itself. "Sweet mother of pearl," whispered his weapons officer, Lieutenant Commander Rosa Valdez. The recordings didn't do them justice. Captain Morrison nodded grimly as he studied the tactical display. The Devourer fleet consisted of 12 massive vessels, each one dwarfing the largest human battleship by a factor of 50. Energy readings indicated power sources that shouldn't be possible according to Earth physics. "All human vessels, this is Admiral Chen," came the voice over the communication channel. "Remember, we're not here to win a traditional engagement. We're here to teach these bastards that this galaxy bites back." The first phase of the battle began exactly as expected. The Concordance fleet, magnificent ships representing the pinnacle of galactic military technology, moved into defensive formation. Their weapons, capable of cracking moons, opened fire on the Devourer vessels with concentrated volleys that lit up space like newborn suns. The beams passed harmlessly through the enemy ships as if they were firing at ghosts. Phase-shifted hulls confirmed, reported Dr. Sarah Kim from her position aboard the research vessel Newton. They're operating partially outside normal spacetime, just like the Veiltar predicted. The Devourers returned fire with weapons that defy description. Beams of twisted spacetime reached out like grasping fingers, and, wherever they touched Concordance vessels, matter simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, simply gone as if it had never been. Within minutes, the defensive line began to crumble. Admiral Thexvar's flagship, the Eternal Vigilance, took a glancing hit that erased half its superstructure. The massive Chromot dreadnought iron will folded in on itself as reality warped around it. All vessels, fall back to secondary positions, Admiral Thexvar commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. Implement Chun Protocol Alpha. This was the moment the humans had been waiting for. As the Concordance fleet executed what appeared to be a panic retreat, the human vessels moved to positions that seemed tactically nonsensical. Instead of forming battle lines or defensive formations, they scattered across the system in seemingly random patterns. Admiral Vector, commanding the lead Devourer vessel, observed the human deployment with the cold calculation of a species that had conquered 17 galaxies. These primitive vessels registered as barely above the threshold of spaceflight capability. Their weapons were chemical-based projectiles and primitive fusion devices. They posed no tactical threat. The Devourers had encountered similar primitive species before. They would be eliminated as an afterthought once the primary resistance was crushed. The first human ship to engage was the destroyer UES Stubborn. Captain Lisa Park had volunteered her vessel for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Her ship, armed with nuclear missiles that belonged in a museum by galactic standards, approached the nearest Devourer vessel at full thrust. "This is Captain Park," she announced over the open channel. "Time to see if these phase-shifted bastards can ignore good old-fashioned atomic fire." The Stubborn's missiles struck the Devourer ship's hull and detonated in brilliant flashes of nuclear fusion. The alien vessel continued on its course, apparently unaffected. But, deep within its quantum-shifted structure, something unexpected happened. The nuclear explosions, primitive as they were, operated on principles that existed in normal spacetime. While the energy couldn't directly damage the phase-shifted hull, the massive electromagnetic pulse generated by the detonations created interference in the dimensional field generators that allowed the Devourers to exist partially outside reality. For exactly 2.3 seconds, the Devourer ship flickered fully into normal space. In those 2.3 seconds, the concentrated fire of 6 human vessels armed with railguns, particle beams, and kinetic impactors struck the alien ship's hull. The weapons were laughably primitive by galactic standards, but they were firing at a target that had suddenly become vulnerable to conventional physics. The Devourer ship staggered, its perfect formation disrupted as damage cascaded through systems that had never been designed to operate while fully materialized in normal spacetime. "Holy shit, it worked!" Lieutenant Commander Valdez shouted over the communications channel before remembering military protocol. "I mean, successful test of the Chun disruption protocol, sir." Captain Morrison couldn't help but grin. The plan was insane, requiring split-second timing and a willingness to sacrifice ships to create brief windows of vulnerability. But it was working. The second phase began immediately. Human vessels throughout the system began coordinated attacks on different Devourer ships, using nuclear weapons not as primary weapons but as disruption tools. Each detonation created brief moments when the alien vessels became vulnerable to conventional attack. The key was the human approach to casualties. Galactic military doctrine emphasized preservation of expensive vessels and trained crews. Human military doctrine, forged in the crucible of planetary warfare where retreat often meant extinction, emphasized achieving objectives regardless of cost. The destroyer UES Relentless, commanded by Captain Maria Santos, flew directly into the firing arc of a Devourer weapon to deliver a nuclear strike at point-blank range. The ship was vaporized instantly, but the electromagnetic disruption allowed the cruiser UES Determination to land devastating hits with its main guns. Devourer Vessel Alpha 3 showing structural damage, reported Dr. Kim from the Newton. Hull integrity down to 60%. They're definitely not invincible. But the humans were paying a terrible price. Within the first hour of engagement, they had lost over 40 vessels. By galactic standards, such casualties would have triggered an immediate withdrawal. The humans pressed their attack with increasing ferocity. Admiral Vector found himself in an unfamiliar position, uncertainty. These primitive creatures were employing tactics that violated every principle of rational warfare. They seemed willing to sacrifice 10 ships to damage one Devourer vessel, an exchange ratio that should have been unsustainable. More disturbing was their apparent complete disregard for conventional tactical doctrine. Instead of concentrating their forces for maximum effect, they spread out across the entire battle zone, making coordinated defense impossible but also making it impossible to eliminate them efficiently. The third phase began when the humans demonstrated their most alien characteristic, adaptability under pressure. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, came the transmission. Pattern analysis suggests the phase disruption lasts longer when we trigger it from multiple vectors simultaneously. Switch to Protocol Beta. Protocol Beta was something no galactic military mind would have conceived. Instead of each human ship attacking individually, they began coordinating their nuclear strikes to create overlapping disruption fields. 3 or 4 ships would sacrifice themselves simultaneously to create windows of vulnerability lasting up to 15 seconds. Captain Morrison found himself commanding one such strike group as the UES Defiance led 2 destroyers toward the largest Devourer vessel. The alien ship's weapons reached out like hungry tentacles, erasing the destroyer courage with casual efficiency. Distance optimal for synchronized detonation, reported Lieutenant Commander Valdez. All nuclear weapons armed and ready. Remember, Morrison said quietly to his crew, we might not see home again, but our kids will because we were here today. The 3 human ships triggered their nuclear arsenals simultaneously, creating a massive electromagnetic storm that forced the Devourer vessel fully into normal space for nearly 20 seconds. In those precious moments, concentrated fire from the heavy cruiser UES Constitution and the battleship UES Indomitable tore through the alien vessel's hull. For the first time in the recorded history of their species, a Devourer ship was destroyed in combat. The explosion lit up the system like a second sun, and, across all frequencies, human voices could be heard cheering with primal satisfaction. They had proven that the seemingly invincible could be killed. But Admiral Vector was no longer viewing this as a simple cleanup operation. The loss of even one vessel was unprecedented. More concerning was the tactical evolution he was observing. These humans were learning and adapting their strategies in real time, something the Devourers rarely encountered from species they conquered. The fourth phase began as the remaining Devourer vessels started to modify their own tactics. Instead of maintaining their standard formations, they began spreading out to minimize the effectiveness of the human disruption attacks. Their weapons, which had been firing in measured, efficient patterns, increased to maximum output in an attempt to eliminate the human threat quickly. This played directly into Admiral Chen's hands. All Concordance vessels, she broadcast, the enemy is now firing at maximum output and has broken formation to counter our tactics. Their phase-shifted defenses will be operating at reduced efficiency. Now is your chance. The battered remains of the Concordance fleet, which had been executing a fighting withdrawal for the past 2 hours, suddenly reversed course. Admiral Fexbar's flagship, running on emergency power but still armed with weapons that could shatter asteroids, led the charge. The phase-disrupted, spread-out Devourer vessels found themselves caught between the hammer of Concordance firepower and the anvil of human sacrifice tactics. For the first time in their conquest of 17 galaxies, they were being systematically outmaneuvered by inferior technology guided by superior tactical thinking. The battle raged for another 4 hours. When it ended, 8 Devourer vessels had been destroyed or so badly damaged they were forced to retreat. The cost was staggering, the human fleet was reduced to fewer than 80 operational vessels, and Concordance losses were equally severe. But they had achieved something no other species had managed in 3 months of war. they had forced the Devourers to retreat from a system they intended to conquer. As the surviving ships regrouped, Admiral Chen's scarred face appeared on communication screens throughout the fleet. Behind her, the bridge of her flagship showed signs of battle damage, and her uniform was torn and stained. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations," she said with a tired but determined smile, "today we proved something important. The Devourers can be beaten. It costs everything we have to give, but they can be beaten." She paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that had seen too much but still burned with resolve. "Tomorrow, they'll bring more ships. They'll adapt to our tactics just like we adapted to theirs. This war is far from over, and the price will only get higher. But today, every species in this galaxy learned something that will keep them fighting. The impossible just takes a little longer." In the depths of space, automated Devourer reconnaissance drones transmitted their reports back to the main fleet. For the first time in their species' expansion across the cosmos, they included a new tactical classification in their files: species requiring enhanced suppression protocols. The Devourer High Command convened in the depths of their primary vessel, a structure so massive it generated its own gravity field. The assembled consciousness known as the Collective had consumed 17 galaxies over the course of millions of years, each conquest following the same efficient pattern: overwhelming technological superiority applied with mathematical precision. The reports from the Terminus defense line should have been impossible. Tactical Analysis Entity 001, the Collective addressed one of its component minds, explained the anomalous data from Sector 7G. The entity processed terabytes of battle data in microseconds. Preliminary conquest of targeted system resulted in 67% mission failure. Primary fleet assets experienced unprecedented resistance from unknown tactical paradigms. Losses deemed unacceptable. Across the galactic arm, the surviving human fleet limped toward the rendezvous point at Kepler Station. Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of her flagship, now the UES Determination, after her original command ship had been destroyed in the second wave of attacks. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the motley collection of damaged vessels that represented humanity's entire contribution to the Galactic War. 73 ships remained operational out of the original 300. By any military standard, her force had been effectively annihilated. By human standards, they had achieved a miracle. "Admiral," came the voice of Dr. Kim over the intercom, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. It seems word of our success at Terminus has spread." Chen made her way to the communication center, where dozens of screens displayed incoming messages from species she had never heard of. The translations scrolled past in a constant stream of hope and desperation. The Alltech Confederacy requests tactical consultation for the defense of their core worlds. The Merchant Guild of Vega offers industrial support for human fleet reconstruction. The warrior clans of Proxima formally request training in unconventional warfare doctrines. But the message that caught Chen's attention came from a source much closer to home. "Admiral, you have a priority transmission from Earth Command," reported Communications Officer Lynch. The screen resolved to show President Martinez in the Oval Office, looking older than when Chen had left Earth 6 months ago. Behind him, through the windows, she could see the lights of Washington, D.C. under a clear night sky. "Admiral Chen," the president began, "the entire world has been following the battle reports. What you and your people have accomplished out there." He paused, searching for words. "Sarah, you've given us something we haven't had in months, proof that we can fight back." He leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. "I won't lie to you. The Joint Chiefs are calling for a full mobilization. Every shipyard on Earth and Mars is being converted to warship production. We're implementing the Wartime Conscription Act and the Emergency Technology Development Program." Chen felt a chill despite the regulated atmosphere of the ship. Earth was preparing for total war, something humanity hadn't experienced since the dark days of the World Wars. "Sarah," the president continued, "we're sending everything we can. The second fleet will launch in 3 weeks, the third fleet is already under construction. But I need to know from someone who's seen them fight, can we actually win this war?" Admiral Chen stared at the screen for a long moment, thinking of the crews she had lost, the ships that had been erased from existence, the enemy vessels that seemed to bend reality itself. Then, she thought of Captain Park's last transmission, of Captain Morrison's final charge, of the moment when the first Devourer ship had exploded under human guns. "Mr. President," she said finally, "winning and surviving are two different things. Can we defeat an enemy with technology so advanced it might as well be magic? Probably not in any traditional sense. But, can we make conquering this galaxy so expensive that they decide it's not worth the cost? Can we teach every species in the concordance that the impossible just takes a little longer?" She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had stared into the abyss and decided to punch it in the face. "Yes, sir. We can do that." 3 weeks later, the second human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Vega system. 250 ships, larger and more heavily armed than the first fleet, but still primitive by galactic standards. What they lacked in technology, they made up for in lessons learned and a tactical doctrine that was evolving faster than any military theory in galactic history. Admiral James Park, brother of the late Captain Lisa Park, commanded the fleet from the battleship UES Vengeance. Unlike the first fleet's desperate charge, the second fleet moved with calculated precision, implementing strategies that had been refined through captured Devourer technology and hard-won experience. The Battle of Vega Prime became the first major engagement where human tactics were fully integrated with Concordance technology. The result was a new form of warfare that combined human adaptability with alien capabilities. All vessels implement Fusion Doctrine Protocol. Admiral Park commanded as the Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace. This time, the enemy brought 30 ships, having learned to respect human capabilities. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. Human vessels, equipped with Concordance shields and weapons, used their sacrifice tactics not with suicidal desperation but with surgical precision. Alien ships provided covering fire and technological support while human crews provided the tactical flexibility to exploit every momentary advantage. The breakthrough came when Commander Sarah Kim, now aboard the research vessel Einstein, discovered that Devourer technology wasn't actually magic, just science so advanced it appeared to be. Their phase-shifting capabilities operated on quantum principles that could be disrupted, their seemingly invincible hulls followed predictable patterns of molecular transformation. "It's not that they're invincible," she explained to the assembled fleet commanders via hologram, "it's that they've never faced anyone willing to die to discover their weaknesses. Every species they've conquered has tried to preserve their forces. We throw ours away to learn how to kill them." The tactical implications were staggering. Within hours, human and Concordance scientists were developing new weapons specifically designed to exploit Devourer vulnerabilities. The electromagnetic pulse generators that had been improvised from nuclear weapons were refined into precision instruments. The sacrifice charges that had been desperate last stands became calculated tactical maneuvers. For the first time since the war began, the Devourers found themselves fighting an enemy that was getting stronger with each engagement rather than weaker. The turning point came during the Battle of the Galactic Core. The Devourers, recognizing the growing threat, committed their entire invasion fleet to a decisive engagement. Over 1,000 of their ships, representing the military might that had conquered 17 galaxies, converged on the Concordance's last stronghold. The defense was coordinated by Admiral Chen, now commanding a mixed fleet of human, Zephyrian, Chromach, and Veiltar vessels. The tactical doctrine had evolved beyond simple sacrifice charges into something that resembled artwork more than warfare. "All units, remember your human training," Admiral Fexbar transmitted from the Eternal Vigilance 2. The alien commander had spent weeks learning human tactical principles, and his four-armed form moved across his bridge with a grace that would have seemed impossible months earlier. The battle raged for 72 hours. Wave after wave of Devourer vessels threw themselves against defenses that bent but never broke, commanded by beings who had learned that retreat was just another tactical option rather than an admission of defeat. When the final Devourer ship limped away into hyperspace, trailing exotic matter from hull breaches that shouldn't have been possible, the galaxy fell silent. The impossible had happened. The Devourers had been not just defeated, but routed. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors and engineers began cataloging the wreckage, Admiral Chen found herself standing in the observation deck of her new flagship, the UES Defiant Hope. Around her, alien and human officers worked side by side, their different biologies united by a shared understanding of what they had accomplished. Dr. Kim approached, her research tablet displaying readings that still seemed like science fiction. Admiral, preliminary analysis of the Devourer retreat shows they're withdrawing from this entire galactic region. Long-range sensors detect their main fleet moving toward the edge of the galaxy. Chen nodded slowly. They're cutting their losses. 17 galaxies of easy conquest, and then they run into us. It's not just us anymore, Dr. Kim pointed out. Every species in the Concordance has adapted human tactics to their own capabilities. The Chromach are developing sacrifice protocols for their automated fleets. The Veiltar are using their phase-shifting abilities to create disruption attacks. Even the peaceful merchant guilds are learning to fight dirty. Through the observation windows, Chen could see the mixed fleet conducting rescue operations. Human destroyers worked alongside Zephyrian cruisers, their crews communicating in a pidgin mixture of languages that was becoming the common tongue of integrated military operations. You know what the strangest part is? Chen mused. 6 months ago, we were a species that had never left our own solar system. Today, we're teaching the galaxy how to fight a war. Dr. Kim smiled. Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needed. A species too young to know that some things are impossible. The final transmission came 3 days later, broadcast on all frequencies from the edge of the galaxy. The voice was synthetic, translated through algorithms that rendered alien consciousness into something approaching human language. Species of the local galactic arm, the message began, the collective acknowledges tactical superiority in contested region. Conquest parameters exceeded acceptable cost projections. Withdrawal to alternate expansion vectors initiated. There was a pause, filled with the subtle harmonics of a vast artificial intelligence processing concepts it had never encountered before. Query, designation for species responsible for tactical paradigm shift? Admiral Chen found herself speaking for her entire species when she responded. We call ourselves human. We come from a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable star. We're new to this galaxy, and we don't know much about cosmic warfare or advanced technology. But we do know one thing that apparently no one else in 17 galaxies has ever taught you. She paused, thinking of every human who had died to make this moment possible, every sacrifice that had proven the impossible was just difficult. We know that sometimes, the best way to win a fight is to be too stupid to know when you're beaten. Thanks for the lesson in galactic politics. Try not to let the door hit you in the ass on your way out. The transmission ended, and, across the galaxy, billions of beings celebrated their continued existence. Humanity had arrived among the stars not as conquerors or diplomats, but as the galaxy's immune system against impossible odds. They had taken their place among ancient civilizations not through technological superiority or political maneuvering, but by demonstrating the simple truth that survival sometimes requires someone willing to punch gods in the face and ask questions later. The galaxy was safe, and it would never be the same.